It's Michael Vanderpool in the country of Georgia, the capital city of Tbilisi. I'm just about less than a minute walk away from Radio Cafe, which is where I'll probably go to next. I'm going to talk a little bit about my current situation on international traveler. As an international traveler for 15 years, so the situation with international travel right now is that if I want to go back to my home city, I have to go through 4 international airports, and it's generally anywhere from 2 hours minimum up to maybe, I don't know, maybe maximum could be 8 hours. It's an average. Flight paths from Tbilisi back to Kansas City, Missouri, which is in the Midwest or in the center of the United States, is about 16 hours with the shortest flight path in 15 years from this location, and about maybe 48 hours, or maybe more like 32 would be a higher end average on the high end. Average between 22 and 32 flight path. So that means typically 3 to 4, but typically 3 flights, 2 of which are international. One, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, is going over the Atlantic Ocean with a layover in Europe, for example. Although I have flown through Moscow, it's been very rare. I have flown through Qatar, but that's also very rare for me. Although now, here's the point. With COVID-19 and the current global pandemic, they were talking about in this particular country, as well as other countries, of maybe requiring a 72-hour in advance PCR coronavirus test, COVID-19 test before allowing entry. They'd have to prove that you're not testing positive with COVID-19 or the new novel coronavirus. And so that could mean that, typically if you want to get a decent price on tickets, you're going to book at least 2 weeks in advance, although in some situations you can do it within 24 hours in advance. But in normal situations, you're going to have to book at least 2 weeks in advance to get decent flight tickets at a decent price. The second thing then is that they may come up with another quarantine, another lockdown. COVID-19 in the United States is spiking in states like Florida, Texas, Oklahoma. Some people I talked to back in Missouri said, well, what do you know? All those states are what? Democrat or something like that. And I had to point out that, even though a lot of people in the United States are focused on, the whole political theater for the election coming up, and I shouldn't say theater, it's much more, in my opinion, may seem naive to say this, but I don't believe it at all. I think it's more correct to say the political spectrum there, the political, that whole scene in America. So, for example, in Switzerland, they are talking already about with their government leaders that they may have to have another quarantines have also been talked about in areas in other countries if it comes up to where the coronavirus is getting out of hand. So to make this short, it's really difficult to say. What I can say is this from my personal view, outside of the fact that there was a period of time here for 2 months that I couldn't have traveled if I wanted to, or I would have paid crazy higher ticket prices, like twice as much money on ticket prices. The second thing is, my own personal view is, I do believe in the viral load theory. So the more exposure to the virus, the more contact with people that may have the virus, whether they're symptomatic or not, whether they're asymptomatic or not, whether they have a temperature or not, although that's a nice measure to employ by businesses and cafes and restaurants and so on. to be testing people's temperature before, allowing them into a place of business, a public place of business or private. That's not full protection. And so the viral load theory is, in essence, the more the virus that you're exposed to, the more chances you're going to get sick. And I think that's one of the reasons why, the meat packing plants have had such a problem with their close quarters workers conditions. And secondly, obviously lacking social distancing, but secondly, when you're on a cruise ship or the U.S. Navy, and the Military Times news I had just read, the Navy, amongst the different armed services in the U.S. military, is the one testing highest and having the biggest problems with that. And that is, I think, the exact same reason they had problems with the cities that were getting the flights in, international flights in, had the biggest recorded breakouts at first, like New York and Michigan, because these international airports were taking all the tourists in from all over the world. They were suddenly being routed, especially through Michigan, for example, because they were going to get special screening, so they reported, before they could be allowed to go on and enter into the United States. They're at the international airports. So that brought in a lot of extra exposure to COVID-19. In New York, I know, was bad because my son, I was just told this morning, he did, I think, go on to another location. I think he left New York. I was told that last night, I think, or this morning, by my mother. But I talked to him earlier, just a few days ago, and he was at ground zero. His office worker was one of the first people to test positive with COVID-19 and had to go home on quarantine for a while, got very sick. He went through the quarantine in New York solo, and he said that New York, at the beginning of the quarantine, the lockdown was like a war zone, with all the emergency vehicles sounding off, the sirens, and they were going everywhere. He said it was just like a war zone. This is exactly how it was described by doctors in Lombardy, Italy, and in northern Italy, and at the ICU directors, ICU nurses, and ICU doctors there in Italy. They said the exact same thing. They said it's like a bomb went off. It was like a tsunami. The journalists were describing it as extremely stressful on the medical clinics and the hospitals there. So, as I said, Switzerland, I just saw in their news, they're still dealing with the discussion about that they may have to do this again. The economy there is worse than any time since, I don't know if they mentioned 1970s or something, but it's basically maybe among the worst economic times really they've ever seen. It's even affected one of the watch makers there that have been around for a very, very long time. And so when I call people back home and talk to them, and they have a lot of suspicion, they have a lot of disbelief, and I'm like, man, I'm seeing that Australia shut down for a year. I'm seeing what the Swiss are talking about this. I've seen what the Italians said. I saw what the real Chinese people in Wuhan said in the beginning. The doctors, the real researchers in America. I mean, medical scientists with electron microscopes or databases where they could just pull up the genomes and the DNA sequencing and compare the virus. I've seen all this stuff all the way back in January, which is when I started to step by step close down myself from outside exposure to this. And even our own experts right now in America are a little bit of a disagreement on what and how things are going. And I just saw news that the White House had just defunded the CDC on further, I think, research with this, and also maybe the funding of any more testing. So that's just horrible news, actually. When the rest of the world, which quite frankly, although people at home might think different, it's a big, big world, and there are countries that quite frankly, they're not so concerned about what is going on with U.S. politics right now. I see an ambulance going right now with the lights on, running silent. We see this all the time here. This is not unusual. We just got out of a lockdown here about, 3 weeks ago, more fully open. In fact, they're not yet to the point to where they're having international tourists back in this country yet. And while this country is developing their, or attempting to develop their political structures, their political way of life, of operating, whatever, because this is the capital city, so it's awful hard not to hear about it. I don't think that the world revolves around the United States or Donald Trump or whoever's going to be in the elections over there. Like some people back home are so caught up in that, and it's understandable. There's very real misuses and misrepresentations and misuses of power, grabs for power, and political agendas that are being twisted in and tied in and abusing the COVID-19 crisis. No question about that, and especially also in the political sphere there in the United States. However, this stuff is real. It's affected countries. See, Australia shut down for the whole year. They're not opened up to tourism here yet because Europe, you know, the epidemiological situation with the virus. Let me check the time real quick. So the bottom line is everything can change. The second thing is, because of the viral load theory, that's why I'm looking at, you know, if I leave Georgia, will it be this week, next week? Will it be in July? Will it be in August? Will it be in September, for example? And it's very difficult to say. I think I know maybe when, but I can't really know when. There's actually quite what one family member called a civil war. In reality, is what is taking place in America. He said whether they will admit to it or whether they will call it that or not. Many others have begun to call it that. Quite frankly, I don't think we're fully in that yet, but I think it has already begun. What we see is civil war type of condition in America. And I think that there are elements that, without Americans consenting to it, without Americans, you know, working against other Americans, fighting against each other, it wouldn't work. But there are elements like the communist movements out of China, which affected the Ferguson riots, and there's talk of how much Soros is allegedly involved in some of these movements and so on and so forth. So there's various outside interests that you know, if Americans wouldn't allow themselves to be pawned off against each other, they wouldn't be basically destroying themselves. So regardless of the outside factors like, you know, Chinese communist movements or you know, Soros's you know, how people are looking that one way or the other with all that stuff. So it takes Americans working against each other to make that happen. And there's no other real, I mean, we can blame it on all these outside forces, but really it's Americans working against Americans, or Americans fighting against Americans. That's what it really is. So my view on that is that there's no way to tell. If I travel, I could have already traveled. I actually originally planned to travel back in November. We had a rental house situation that was for a little bit outside of our control as far as timing. Things were moved on as fast as they could, but it was significantly delayed. Then it was decided that it was better, due to the size of the house and the property, that and the weather and the kind of work that needs to be done, that it would be better to wait for warmer weather, like mid-March or mid-May. Then this pandemic came in and the flight restrictions came in, and another wait-and-see kind of thing. So, but it's really unknown. It's unknown. But it's possible that I could leave here or any other location, but I could leave here and not be back for forever, or not be back for, you know, whatever period of time, maybe 2 or 3 years. Maybe it takes that long. Maybe they come up with vaccines, if they can ever come up with a vaccine, if they can even do it. You know, if they can get to the point to where it's even manageable, to where, you know, you're not concerned about such a viral load factor and exposures when you're doing international travel. In my case, through 4 international airports, 3 flights, 2 of which are going to be international flights from here into Europe likely, or even into Turkey, for example, and then into Chicago, for example, or New York, or you know, whatever. So you know, that's the thing. That's the whole issue. It's very difficult to know, because I'm not one to want to take that risk of the whole situation with international travel has dramatically changed and will continue to dramatically change due to the COVID-19, the global pandemic, and the risk of viral infection because of those flights. Secondly, it's going to be that it's an increased risk, by the way. I should say that and state it like that. The increased risk of exposure to COVID-19 or infection. And the other factor, the co-factor in this, is the economic collapse, the economic devastation from the lockdowns, which are necessary, but also from the loss of workers in some places, you know, either because of the disease factor itself, the illness or death, or because of the fact that people they've had to be laid off or work from home and change the whole work condition and way of working and operating in the sphere of work. So it's I see it as a challenge. All I'm saying is, and the reason I'm making this video on this particular point, on this particular day, the main point being, I don't know if I will be back to this location or any other location, or when, or how long. Because the fact is, the COVID-19 is not going away. It is a problem that is expected to be ongoing for at least a couple of years, at least, in a way that is problematic beyond just your other pandemics. And historically, this time frame that I'm talking about, I mean, it may never be eradicated, for example, but at least, we can hope by then that they would have some more science behind what is really going on and how to manage, or how to deal with it one way or the other, in one way or another. The wind's picking up, so let me check the time. It's a good way to test this mic. It's windy enough now. The wind has picked up. So that's exactly what I don't know. I really don't know. And so it might be that I fly away from here. It could be this week. It could be next week. More likely, it would be at minimum, in July, just because of the flight prices and availability. But it's more likely that it would be August, for example, or maybe even September. Who knows? But in a time like this, when there is widespread civil unrest in the United States, when there is the economic devastation that is happening worldwide from the global pandemic, when there is changing rules and questions about what procedures and flights, how will they be affected, how will how will international travel be affected? That's it. Very simply, it's hard to know. What I can say is what common sense tells me, what science tells me, what science that I'm aware of so far on this topic, is that I don't want the viral load. I want the least amount of exposure to the virus as possible, if at all, and that any, travel by cruise ship, any travel by mass transit, trains, airplanes, that's problematic. That increases the exposure to COVID-19, pure and simple, because I've traveled internationally for 15 years at least, one time a year up to maybe 6 times a year, In fact, if it was in Panama, that would be more like 8 times in a year, because Panama, there was no jet lag. Panama was not so long of a flight, but it was still very much an international travel from the equatorial region of the world on up into North America and back. So anyway, so I've done a lot of international travel. There comes another ambulance. It's running silent pretty much. It wasn't for a second though. The lights are going. But anyway, that's it. It's hard to know. It's really hard to know. And I'm this guy that, you know, I aced the sciences in high school, and I took microbiology. I took biology 1, biology 2. I competed in that. I took chemistry. And I was a gifted student. I was in advanced placement classes for that. I took biology again in college. So I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. But what I can say is that I have a basic understanding of the sciences in this way, and there's no way that I want to increase the viral load or exposure or the risk of infection. There's no way I want to do that. And this problem's not going away for a couple of years, regardless of what some governments may or may not be stating on this. The lights just came on, it's beautiful. And regardless of what so-called experts are saying, I've seen from enough countries, especially Switzerland and the United States and here, to know that this is probably going to be something we'll be dealing with for a minimum of another couple of years. So I know there's differences on the way they do the diagnostics, the way they're doing the testing. They changed, for example, in Missouri from the CDC model and way of testing and calculating and all that, and suddenly all the numbers dropped. While in other states, they've shot up, they've gone up. And let's just get away from numbers. Let's talk about Florida. Florida had the ICU units 73 or 78%. One or the other, full. 73 to 78% full. This is like about 5 or 6 days ago. And it was in 17 hospitals. It's a very big spike in COVID-19 cases in Florida. So anyway, I'll stop talking about this topic. Most people won't want to hear this that are watching me talk about this, but bottom line is, it's really hard to know. It's really hard to know. It's going to be my feeling for the next 2 years, at least I know, that I will want to reduce my any travel by public transit, and that includes by ship, which I've never done, train, or airplane, because all of those forms of travel for me are going to be public. It's a form of public transit, and I'm not going to want to take on the viral load or take on that risk of exposure, because I think it'll take at least 2 years, maybe 3, for them to get a better management and solution, if any, to this COVID-19 epidemic, this global pandemic, pandemic. So that's it. If I go, maybe I come back, maybe not, but likely it would be, very unlikely it would be within the next 2 to 3 years. In fact, I'm looking at, you know, whether I want to spend time between Arizona, maybe, summers in Colorado, maybe Missouri. It depends. I'd hope to spend time on the Gold Coast in Australia, but now I might at some point try to visit out in Sedona again, in that area. I don't know how far Phoenix is exactly from there, but you know, I love the idea of spending, you know, a month or 2 in Colorado in the summer only. They get entirely way too much snow for me, and they have way too long of a winter for my I'm just not going to do winter. And if I can avoid winter, that's the reason why I want to look at Arizona, because I've been in Arizona several times on travel. Well, you know, maybe 3 or 4 times, 5, 6 times. But when you have a car accident and you have some car accident injuries, it's commonly known. You don't want to, you don't like being in a winter, like very cold winter, because those things, like, you kind of feel those injuries come back. You know, you kind of feel if it gets very cold, and it got really cold the winter in Missouri where the Arctic blast came through, and I'm like, I will never want to be spending time in the winter like this ever again. You know, when we're in Colorado, you can be there in the summer and go right up this road on Marble Lake, I think it is. I can't remember the name of the reservoir there. It's not so far from Denver, but they had a short mountainside that we were going to climb, but it got so steep that I didn't want to continue to try to go up. I'm not a professional mountain climber or something, but we had fun doing that. We had a friend named Jason, and we had taken a road trip out there. I'd taken like 9 or 10 road trips out to Colorado, alone or with someone else. And the thing about it is that you can walk right up the road, and there's winter because it's the mountain top. It's like the mountain range at the top. It is like snowing, and we had a snowball fight, and then you could walk right back down the trail about 10-15 minutes, and it is fresh alpine and pine air. Just fabulous. It's really lovely. Pine needles, cedar trees, alpines, lovely. A lot like what's here in Georgia, but in Colorado is where we had that experience. We're actually having a snowball fight in the middle of summer, and it is cold wind, the granite of the mountaintop and the snow-covered mountaintop, and I mean, it's just like it was like a hardcore winter. 15 minutes down the trail, we're in sunshine, it's warm, you didn't need a jacket, and the smell of cedar, pine, alpine trees, all this stuff. It was really beautiful and really fantastic. That's my favorite type of scenario. And it was right at this lake. But in fact, that's where my oldest son just went to. He went to, I guess I won't say exactly, I don't know if it matters or not. I didn't ask him, but it's a hell of a lot smaller than New York, I'll tell you that. It's very close to where I was just talking about. It's about, I think, less than 30 or 45 minutes drive from where I just talked about. I'd have to look it up on the map again. So, Arizona is warm all year round. There are little to no, I've been told there's no mosquitoes in Arizona. Sedona is a huge metaphysical community. It's known for astrologers. They've got, though before COVID-19, they had huge amount of tourists coming in there. I think Nevada's close to there, right next door or something. And not that I want to spend a lot of time in Nevada, but if you ever wanted to try something like with erotic film or something like that, their laws are more conducive for that. Probably one of the most conducive laws for that type of thing in the whole United States. I'd have to check. But Colorado is where I'd want to spend my 1 or 2 months out of the summer at least. Arizona is more, it's warm all year for sure. No mosquitoes. That's kind of what I'm looking at right now. Thinking about that. I have to check it out. But the whole global, the whole international travel for this next 2 or 3 years for me is going to be probably something that I avoid unless absolutely necessary. So that would suggest that, you know, I don't know if I'm going to return to Georgia or not. If I return to Georgia, it would probably be, unless there's some, like, you know, serious, like, I don't know, it'd have to be, I don't know. I just really don't think within the next 2 or 3 years, I don't think that's going to happen. I could be wrong, but I don't think I'm going to want to take that type of risk. So, the whole global travel thing for me is really now, for at least 2 or 3 years now, it's really a big question in my life because of my view on the global pandemic and the viral load theory and the risk, the heightened risk of public transit, and that includes international flights especially, or even domestic flights for that matter. One of our top medical doctors in the United States said that the COVID-19 was not going to come and go in waves. He said it was appearing to be more like an ongoing, raging fire. That's how he described the COVID-19. In any case, I'll stop with this topic. It's not a pleasant topic. But I have some friends that watch, and if they wanted to understand how I look at this, now they can now they can understand how I look at it. It's not pleasant. I love and have enjoyed international travel for over 15 years, expat style. Expat style means someone that spends an extended period of time outside the country of their birth, the country of their citizenship. And that's me. I've done that for 15 years. And and where I'm at right now, it's a very beautiful scene. I wish I could just turn the camera around, but you know, as far as a park in the city, the wind blowing through, it's a summer evening. Officially, we are, I think, what is it, the 24th of June or so here, so it's a very beautiful evening, but not a very pleasant topic. So, but I just wanted to explain it, because if I have family or friends, I can say, hey, I've talked about how I look at that. If you want to take the time to look at that video, then there it is. It's very unpleasant, because I love to travel. I love to travel, but it's not going to be it's just not going to be very safe in this next 2 or 3 years. It's not. It's just not. It's going to be a significant risk to be involved in public transport, public transit, ships, airplanes, buses, trains, etc. It's going to be a risk. It is. That's just the fact. I don't care what experts are saying or not saying. I've heard enough and read enough and studied enough, and I know enough. Well, I've even March 15, I posted to Facebook that the peak would be somewhere between May 8 to maybe all through June, or in Missouri especially, but in America. Well, Missouri changed their testing, the CDC model and method, and they suddenly, the numbers dropped down. But when I talk to friends, like one friend knows, I think 4 or 5 people there in a town of only 13,000, or in a small county in Missouri, which previous to that had the highest rate of infection in the whole damn state per capita. And suddenly, when they changed the method of testing from the CDC to what they alleged to be more accurate with, suddenly they have almost no numbers in 1 week of positive tests. Suddenly the White House, within the last 24 hours or so, is stopping funding to the CDC and stopping money for further testing. What the hell? You know, that's insane. That's what that is. It's politics. It's greed. It's skewing. It's going to be skewing the facts. It's the most. I'd have to say this is perhaps one of the most anti-science and science administrations in the U.S. I've ever seen. You know, I'm 50 years old. I've never seen anything like this. And the news is just coming out today that I'm seeing. I'm only seeing it today. They're stopping funding to the CDC on this COVID-19. They're stopping funding for more testing. This is insane. You know, it's just insane. So, it's an unpleasant truth. It's a very, very hard fact. And because I looked at the hard truth and the hard facts from a PhD biologist doing computer modeling of when it would peak there in the United States, I knew from May 8 forward. Also numbers from a guy that goes by Get Peace Right on Facebook, who got numbers from Billy Edward Albert Meyer's son, Atlantis, out of He's in Canada now. I talked to him, had very big pleasure and opportunity to talk with him face to face back in when I was in Switzerland in 2011 or 2012 or so, and so the numbers that he was allowed to release finally, and that Get Peace Right put in, and then I saw that it matched up with some things that I could see with the astrology that I do in my own life and in the situation. And here it is. It's June, and they are setting records in Texas. They're setting records in Texas on COVID-19. I think also maybe in Florida, also maybe the situation in California is also still really bad. There's 8 states at least minimum. And unlike some people, yeah, sure, there can be some politics involved here and there, but on both sides, one side or another. The facts are the hospitals in some of these locations are overwhelmed, or they're 73 to whatever % full with COVID-19 cases in the IC beds, the ICU units. And that's it. I'm going to stop talking about this. Very, very unpleasant. The only reason I make this video basically is because I was right on my prediction, by the way. It's June right now. It's about June 24, 25 or something like that, and there's enough peaking going on in the United States and the States, and there's already a delay as far as maybe when Europe can arrange, you know, international travel here, tourists come in here as planned with Georgian government. They hope to do that on July 1st, but they're being very careful and considerate about the epidemiological situation. So, and in short, I was right back what I wrote on May 15 from 3 different sources that I used to see that. Beyond governments, right, wrong, or indifferent, one or another. I got it right. And my sources are excellent on this information, and I usually have several different disciplines and several different sources, and when they all match up, especially, this is how I did this. This is how I was able to predict on March 15 to the internet that there in Missouri, but in the United States, but especially Missouri, it will overflow. It will peak. So I got a friend back there that knows 4 or 5 people that died of kidney causes, and I've got a cousin and another woman that used to work for me in business that had they both had ischemic strokes, or a stroke. One couldn't move part of the face, the other one was, I don't even know if it was heart or what, but they both had strokes. Stroke was doubled during the time of COVID-19 in New York. And younger people, both these people are about my age or so. Again, I'm 50, so this is meaning that it was consistent with what they'd seen in the emergency, the medical emergency that COVID-19 brought to New York, which required the quarantines, the lockdowns in New York. And my son left there. I think my mom said today he had left there. He's in Colorado, or he's on his way to Colorado, which is good. It was the most difficult thing ever to go through this lockdown alone. I've went through some very hard times and places in my life, so I can handle it, and I did, but I would never want to do it again in the way that I did it. I didn't do anything like really negative per se. It's just that I would have been more active in nature, more, because I usually am, but I held back a little bit because of this, and I shouldn't have at all. That was the biggest part of the mistake. And that's why probably I'm making videos every day in the park. It's like, oh my god, it's like right now the wind is blowing, the breeze just picked up as I tuned in with that statement, and nature. If you love to travel, come to Georgia. They've got beaches, the Black Sea coast, and they've got black sand in Shekhatili. They've got Batumi Boulevard. They got the beach there. They've got other cities and towns with beach fronts, beaches, Nakhlia, and so on. So they've got some of the most beautiful mountain scenery in Europe, in my opinion. I certainly love Switzerland, but also here in even Kalketti's nice. But if you want to like really get to the grand mountain scenery, you go up to Kazbeki. Even Borjomi is beautiful. I saw a woman, Rusa, and I guess it was her friend, at the workout equipment in Borjomi, and man, they were looking fit and looking like they were enjoying that there. But I've been in Borjomi. I've got a film in Borjomi when I was with Kate back in the time that we traveled there, and I told her, I said, you'll always want to remember this. I said, you probably won't see something like this again for another 10 or 13 years as far as Borjomi goes. I think she went on up to Kazbeki. In fact, after we broke up, we weren't together or communicating anymore, and we still don't communicate, and we're not together, and I don't expect that we'll be together. But the point is to share with people that want to know about this country. She did go to Kazbeki herself. Everybody loves Kazbeki. It's the most traveled place in Georgia. There is a fantastic monastery up there that has a panoramic view that is world class. They've got the fastest rapids in Europe there. You can go hiking through Kazbeki, you can ride horses in Kazbeki. I think maybe you can do ATV, four-wheelers, things like that. Also Mestia in Swaneti. I don't hear about it so much, but Mestia, it's also a place that's just mind-blowing if you love mountain scenery and travel there. Well, this is enough. I've talked entirely too much, but I have exhausted. There's one thing I've known amongst friends and family and that's research. Being able to be both resourceful and research. In fact, one lawyer we paid $5,000 to back in Marshall, and he was a former prosecutor over in Pettis County. When he shook my hand, he goes, I bet you will know more about this than I will. And he was right. Within 5 or 10 minutes I got on the internet and I did a little research, and I found a page through a Russian-American private investigator, actually private detective, and I found a strategy that I could have employed in the situation I was dealing with that would have absolutely solved anything and everything in that situation. But I chose not to go with that strategy. But I had already within 5 minutes found a completely usable strategy that I could have absolutely just aced right. And so that was my reputation then, and still is amongst the people that really know me closely. I'm very adept at being resourceful and researching information and getting that information and seeing through cross disciplines, and when things line up. That's why it was so easy to predict that now in the United States, in some of these states, it's now, they wouldn't even say peaking now. Now they're saying like a raging fire. One medical expert said more like a raging fire. Instead of being like waves, this has never really quit. It just keeps coming up, 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 up. And so when they reopen, spikes, the surges come up again with the infection rates and stuff with COVID-19 pandemic. So that's the next 2 or 3 years, my friends, my view on global travel, it's going to change for me. And that's why I have to look at the timing and the circumstances in a very reality-based, practical, and very sober point of view. And that's what I've just shared with you. Have a good one.